Welcome to PsychGrad Reacts, my YouTube channel where I look at different types of media through a psychological lens for both fun and educational purposes. Today I'll be focusing on a UK holiday staple, Love Actually. Love Actually is a film that contains several different interconnected storylines that focus on love. Or do they? Each storyline might be a bit more complicated than that. Spoilers ahead. We meet David on his first day as the newly elected Prime Minister of Great Britain. He is then introduced to his household staff, and through exposition, we the audience find out that he is not married, nor does he have any children. He then meets Natalie, who is a new member of staff, and it shows, as she becomes a victim to word vomit and swears. He makes her feel better by doing the same, and a laugh is shared. He is then introduced to other members of staff before being shown his office. It is clear by the fact that he looks back at Natalie that there is an attraction. This is only confirmed when he is alone.
Oh no, that is so inconvenient.
4 weeks to Christmas, and David is in a meeting discussing how to proceed when the President of the United States comes to England. Some on his team believe that he should show strength and not be bullied as previous administrations had been. However, David does not wish to do this as it could damage the relationship between both countries. His team are clearly not happy with this, and to ease the tension, David makes a joke.
Right, who do you have to screw around here to get a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit?
Like clockwork, Natalie comes in with said items, and the two look at each other as sweet music plays in the background. Sometime later, Natalie is dropping off documents at David's desk. As she's leaving, he calls her back into his office. He claims that he feels uncomfortable working in such close proximity to one another and knowing little about her. She claims that there isn't much to know. This statement doesn't dissuade him from asking his questions, the first being where she lives. Him knowing where she lives is a setup for something later in the movie, but it doesn't stop it from being a weird first question to ask someone you barely know. She tells him which area in which she lives in, and it so happens to be that his sister lives in the same area, but in very different neighborhoods. He then goes on to ask her if she lives with her husband or boyfriend, assuming she's straight, and whether or not she had any children. I'm not too versed on employment law, but can her boss ask her these questions? If anyone knows, please leave a comment below because I am truly curious. She says no, and that her and her boyfriend had recently broken up, and that she was living back with her parents. Although David says he's sorry, he does so with a smile on his face. She then tells him that it's a good thing, as he would often make comments about her body and tell her that no one would want her at her size. This information does one of two things to the audience. 1, it makes her ex look awful, and 2, it makes David look more desirable in comparison. I mean, yeah, he's her boss, but at least he's not a horrible person. To make Natalie feel better, he says,
Being Prime Minister, I could just have him murdered.
As sweet as this joke was, it's also terrifying. Let's focus on what just happened. Although she kind of hinted that she didn't want to talk about herself, saying that there was little to know, David still began to ask her a series of extremely personal questions to basically find out if she was single. If he were to play devil's advocate, maybe he asked her this line of questioning because he hoped that she was taken. And with that knowledge, it could help him get over his crush. He clearly doesn't want to be attracted to her.
That is so inconvenient. Natalie. Come on, get a grip. You're the Prime Minister, for God's sake. You have this kind of problem?
Because he understands how complicated things could get. However, he is clearly happy when she tells him that she is single. David goes on to meet with the President of the United States, who is visiting England alone. The reason for this is outlined in dialogue, that due to David's single status, the First Lady would be bored, so she chose to stay in America. President isn't given an official name, so let's call him POTUS from now on. POTUS is then shown around 10 Downing Street by David. Whilst doing so, they both bump into Natalie. Once out of earshot, POTUS makes a comment about how attractive Natalie is, which seems to upset David. David and POTUS are in a meeting, and POTUS's team wishes to continue the previous administrative's terms, as they favour him. However, David's team wishes to change the terms as there is a new administration in power. David tries to calm things down and move on to another subject. We then cut to David and POTUS alone in a room having a much calmer discussion. However, POTUS makes it clear that he's willing to be flexible, but only on his terms. David then leaves the room to get an item that is close to his heart and that he wishes to discuss with POTUS. As he leaves, Natalie walks in with refreshments. We, the audience, follow David.
Hi.
And as he enters back into the room, POTUS has stood up, whispering something in Natalie's ear. They all freeze and Natalie states that she has to leave now, looking very uncomfortable. POTUS then goes on to make the following remarks as Natalie leaves the room.
Natalie, I hope to see much more of you as our two great countries work toward a better future.
As Natalie leaves, David and POTUS look at one another. It is clear that something inappropriate happened, but it's unclear as to what that was. The next scene opens at a press conference and a reporter asks POTUS how his visit to England has been. POTUS somewhat boasts that he has gotten what he wants from the visit and ensures the press that both countries will continue their relationship. However, David states that he thinks that they have a bad relationship where POTUS takes what he wants.
And casually ignoring all those things that really matter to, Britain.
He says this looking directly at Natalie, so we the audience don't mistake what he's really talking about. He then goes on to say that England will now show a level of strength going forward. As cathartic as this moment feels, it's also hollow, as this wasn't part of a political plan to show strength at a later time, it was in reaction to what transpired between Natalie and POTUS. I understand why the scene played out the way it did, however, I think it would have meant more to Natalie and to us if he had said something there and then, versus during an impassioned speech in front of the world, where only 3 people understood the true meaning of what was being said. Due to his speech, politically things are going in David's favour. We then follow David as he dances around 10 Downing Street to Jump by the Pointer Sisters. David invites Annie, his head of staff, into his office. Once Annie discovers that the topic of conversation is about Natalie, she then goes on to make several offhanded comments about Natalie's size, which I think was meant to be comedic, but just felt unnecessary and inappropriate, especially to say to your boss. David then asks Annie for the following favour.
Don't ask me why, and for heaven's sake, don't read stuff into this. I wonder if you could, redistribute her.
It's done.
David is then given several Christmas cards by members of staff, including one from Natalie. The card reads,
Dear Sir, dear David, Merry Christmas and I hope you have a very happy New Year. I'm very sorry about the thing that happened. It was a very odd moment and I feel like a prize idiot, particularly because if you can't say it at Christmas, when can you, eh? I'm actually yours, with love, your Natalie.
Moved by her words, he arranges for a car to be driven to her home. Due to a previous line of conversation earlier in the film, he knows what street she lives on but is unsure what her door number is. After several attempts, he finally reaches the right house.
Is, Natalie here?
Where the f*** is my coat?
David is then introduced to Natalie's family, who are on their way to Natalie's little brother's Christmas concert. David claims to need Natalie on state business, which is a ballsy lie, as she might have told him that she no longer works for him anymore. Natalie tries to get out of going to the Christmas concert, but her mother stresses that her little brother would be disappointed if she wasn't there. David uses his police escort to drive the majority of Natalie's family to the school. However, due to the size of her little brother's costume, he was unable to fit in the car and had to go with Natalie and David, giving us this brilliant image. David thanks Natalie for the Christmas cards. She tells him that he's welcome. After a brief pause, she apologizes and assures him
Nothing happened, I promise.
She tells him that she thinks about him a lot, and before she's able to fully let him know how she feels, they arrive at the school. David states that he probably should go, but he wishes he could stay. Natalie, wanting to continue their conversation, sneaks David backstage, where he bumps into his sister Karen. She gives him a long embrace, the reason for why will be explored more in her video, but she's excited to see him, and assumes that he's there to see his nephew and niece in the school concert. He does not correct her. He then introduces Natalie to Karen, who states that she should be careful, as 20 years ago, Natalie would have been David's type. Clearly, she still is. Whilst backstage, the two share a kiss, and later a curtain pulls back to reveal the two to a surprised crowd.
Smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave.
They promptly leave the stage. Their storyline ends at the airport where Natalie is waiting for him. Excited, she jumps on him, where he makes a joke about how heavy she is, which could have been funny if it wasn't an established insecurity. She replies in jest, and the two walk away, arms wrapped around one another. David and Natalie's storyline is about the difficulties that may arise when you have feelings for someone that you work with, just set in 10 Downing Street. Since we spend more time at work than in any other areas of our life, it makes sense that this is where we are most likely to meet our future partners. For this reason, rules and regulations are put into place to mitigate and prevent any issues that could occur from a workplace romance, including managers and supervisors are prohibited from dating their subordinates. This prevents employees from feeling coerced into relationships and co-workers from harbouring any jealousy or resentment towards one another. Fortunately, neither of these things happened in their storyline. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that David is Natalie's boss. In fact, he's her boss's boss. And not to quote an ad from a dating app, this video is not sponsored, but data boss, just not yours. Technically, Natalie no longer works for David, but that's only because he had her redistributed, which is a problem in and of itself. It could be argued that this may have been the only option for them to establish their relationship in a less problematic way. However, the film doesn't imply that this was the reason why he had her relocated, unless it did and I missed it. Either way, she should have definitely been included in the decision-making process. When I think about David and Natalie's storyline, there's one thing that comes to mind, and it isn't love, it's power and the imbalance of it. And I'm not just talking about the fact that David is the Prime Minister. I'm talking about the fact that if we were to go through the events of their storyline and just focus on Natalie, not only do things become less romantic very quickly, but it's hard to ignore the power imbalance. She was harassed by the President of the United States, but then she is redistributed to another department after being harassed.
I wonder if you could, redistribute her.
By moving Natalie to another department, David acknowledges what happened to her but doesn't validate her experience, making it appear as though he's blaming her. This could cause Natalie to internalize the experience, resulting in misplaced guilt, which could explain Natalie's constant need to apologize to David directly.
I'm very sorry about the thing that happened. I'm so sorry about that day.
Since David is played by Hugh Grant, it makes sense that we, the audience, follow him. However, I wish we had followed Natalie more, or instead, especially since a lot happens to her, none of it her fault, and we're never really shown how it has affected her. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think it would be a mistake for David and Natalie to date, and here's why. David needs to work on his conflict avoidant issues, which is ironic given his job. Conflict avoidance means precisely what it implies, someone who makes every effort to avoid any potential conflict, whether that is at work.
This is our first really important test. Let's take a stand.
I understand that, but I have decided not to.
The last administration made it perfectly clear. We're just being consistent with their policies.
They were bad policies.
Let's, move on, shall we?
With friends or family,
I always tell your secretary that these things are going on. It never occurred to me you'd actually turn up.
I thought it was about time I did.
and romantic relationships. One could argue that David did confront protests during his speech, but that was after the fact, on a completely different day. It would have been more impactful if he had said something immediately. It's not like David was concerned about the consequences of confronting another world leader, as he did so publicly rather than privately. This one act of, let's say, decency that actually ends up serving David more than it ever serves Natalie doesn't erase his complacency and inaction. Regarding Natalie, there are two priorities in her life that demand her attention, and neither of them are establishing a new relationship. The first is stability. According to Google, the span of the film happened over 5 weeks. In that time, Natalie has gotten out of an emotionally abusive relationship, moved back in with her parents, and started a new job. Twice, technically, due to being redistributed. At this point in time, Natalie has little to no stability in her life, and dating the Prime Minister wouldn't provide her with that. In fact, it would make things worse, but more on that later. The second priority is self-worth. It could be seen that a previous relationship has negatively impacted her sense of self, which isn't helped by people constantly belittling or making fun of her.
He said I was getting fat. He said no one's going to fancy a girl with thighs the size of big tree trunks. Not a nice guy, actually.
You know Natalie, who works here?
The chubby girl? I think there's a pretty sizable ass there, yes, sir.
Come on later, Plumpy.
Which can lead to low self-esteem. I believe that with better self-esteem, she would be able to hold those who need to be held accountable. Low self-esteem can affect almost every aspect of someone's life, including their relationship, work, and health. There are ways to increase one's self-esteem, but first one needs to identify the factors that can affect it, which Natalie hasn't done. An in-depth look into self-esteem and steps on how to gain better self-esteem is provided in the link below. As romantic as this story portrays their storyline, I can't help but see the issues. Not only the issues leading into their relationship, including the power dynamic, but the issues that they may face in the future. For example, how Natalie's life will be affected by dating someone like David. I cannot profess to know what it's like to date someone who's a public figure, but going off of real-world examples doesn't seem like a fun experience. David has somewhat signed up for life in the public eye, however Natalie and her family haven't. Speaking of family, both David and Natalie have met each other's family before their first date, kiss, anything, somewhat cementing their relationship in a serious status before they've had the chance to do it themselves. Let's say they were able to climb over all the hurdles that I've mentioned, and more, and they have the happy ending that the film suggested they do. What about POTUS? Do we just forget what happened to only be reminded when POTUS comes back to England or David has to go to America? It wouldn't be a leap to say that Natalie is likely to think about being harassed and David's inaction of said harassment. However, we never know how she feels about it because she's never asked. At no point does he ask if she's okay, nor does he ensure her that what happened wasn't her fault and that there is no need to apologise. Yet, the film decides to focus on other priorities, like David dancing through 10 Downing Street. I know what you're thinking. It's only a short storyline, they can't cover everything, and I don't expect them to. However, the David and Natalie storyline is one of, if not the longest storyline in Love Actually, coming in at just under 23 minutes. I figure if a 22-minute episode of a show can change the trajectory of an entire season, possibly a series, then yeah, I expect their storyline to have done more, especially when tackling such a serious topic. However, we don't know what was left on the editor's floor. All in all, I believe that their storyline just has too many glaring issues to be deemed as romantic. And although I haven't created a scoring system for every storyline, for me this would rank quite low due to those issues. It felt as a way to make David look better, almost every man that Natalie had been in contact with had to be awful in comparison. No shade to anyone who enjoys this storyline, I understand why. Hugh Grant's bumbling charm is in full effect and it does supply a particular fantasy. However, I just can't help how I see it through the way it was presented. Thank you for watching my video on Love Actually. More featured storylines will be up soon. I have been PsychGrad Reacts. Please follow me on Instagram at PsychGrad Reacts. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Be kind to one another in the comments and I'll see you on the next video. Bye!